This video is to help troubleshoot the Poultry Hawk control panel. If your Poultry Hawk is not responding to the commands that you are giving on the key fob, then there are some step-by-step procedures here that I want to show you to help troubleshoot and get your Poultry Hawk back up and running, and to help exactly diagnose the exact problem. So I have laid out here a board where I have pulled out some of the key components from the control panel so we can just see it laid out. And I'm going to go through a few step-by-step processes that will help you troubleshoot and diagnose the exact problem. So we have our incoming 12-volt power. On the incoming power to the control board, we have the directional fuse diode, normally somewhere upline from the control board. Here we have the control board. On the control board, we have the receiver chip. This is what receives the command from the remote. Over here we have the speed control. And off of the speed control we have the speed pot, which controls the speed. Here we have a replica of the motor, just to replicate that. Here we have some of the different remotes that are out in the field, and here we have the proximity switch that is up beside the motor and gearbox that tells it when to stop along the track. So those are our main components. To begin troubleshooting, we want to make sure that we have 12-volt power. So we want to make sure that there is a good 12 volts being supplied to these sources, whether it's a speed control, control board. We want to make sure that a good 12 volts is coming to them. So we want to make sure that we check our battery, make sure the terminals are not corroded and there's a good connection and that we have 12 volts. So we can check right here to make sure there is 12 volts right there. We can also check right here that there's 12 volts here on the speed control. If there is not 12 volts here on the control board, then we go upline and we want to check that fuse diode and make sure that that is not blown. There's times when the speed control fails, and that can feed upline and blow this directional fuse diode. So if we don't have 12 volts here, we may check that. When we have 12 volts here, we will notice that the lights, there's two lights on here on the control board. And that should normally indicate us that the control board is powered up. If we get to the point now where we give a command and we are not noticing any function. So we're pushing the remote and we notice that the light is blinking here. It's getting a command, but nothing is happening on the control board. Then there's a couple steps here that we want to go through that help to diagnose exactly what is wrong. To begin with, we want to check and reset the remote. In order to do that, on the back of the remote, on each one of these remotes, it's all the same. So whether it's any one of these remotes, this is the latest remote. Some of you may have this remote or this remote. They all really function much the same. So in the back of any one of these, we would simply take a pin and push this reset button back here, and I got to make sure you push it, and we'll notice that a blue light blinks, and that'll be the same for any of these other remotes as well. So we're resetting the remote. So that is step one, and so we're going to wait till the light quits blinking. And then after the light quits blinking, we need to reprogram the remote. So we'll hit that button again. And while this light is blinking, we're going to hit all the buttons. And that reprograms this remote. So we'll do it in a clockwise fashion. And that reprograms this remote. And that is a very key step in this process. If you ever want to cancel a remote with a control board, that way it does not talk to it, this is again a way you can do that. So now that we've reprogrammed the remote, what we want to do is now sync it back with the board. And in order to do that, we will just simply hit this button right here beside the antenna, and we want to make sure that this light begins to blink. And when that light is blinking, we will pair the remote by hitting all these buttons again in a clockwise fashion, hitting all these buttons. And we'll wait for the light to quit blinking. So now that the light is stopped blinking, we will then try to hit this, and you will notice what should happen is that you will see these relay lights light up, and you see that my motor is working. So before, we were getting a command, but it wasn't engaging. We want to make sure we hear a click in the relays and that the relay lights light up. So we realize now that it is working properly. So that is how that is the first step. If we get to this, if we reset and repair the remote, and it's still, we see it's getting a signal, but it's still not engaging, not doing what it's supposed to doing, we're going to go to the next step. And that step is we want to disconnect the power. Anytime we move anything, we'll disconnect the power. And we'll simply take this receiver chip, we'll pull the receiver chip off, and that is done by simply pulling it off. It can just very carefully be pulled right off. And then we want to go ahead and take it off, and we're going to go ahead and put it back on. And you just want to be careful. Lots of close pins there. We want to make sure we get the pins right back in the same hole. Once we have gotten the receiver chip back in place, we'll turn the power back on. And again, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go through the repairing process. And it would be good to go ahead and reset the remote, reprogram the remote, and then we want to go ahead and hit the button, let it blink, and repair them. There can be times through this process that one time it may not happen quite right, and the next time, for whatever reason, as you reset it, it clears everything and goes back to working. So that is the next step. So now that it's done, we try it. And again, it looks like it is working correctly. Now, if we go to all this and the board still does not seem to work, the relays are not clicking, we see a light blinking, or maybe not even that, if it's not working, then the next step would be to go and get a remote. If you have another Poultry Hawk, go get the remote from a working Poultry Hawk, bring it to this house with this Poultry Hawk, and go ahead and sync that good remote with this the board that is not working properly. Go ahead and sync it and see if that corrects the problem. If bringing another remote and pairing it still does not work, then go to that same Hawk possibly, and go ahead and get that receiver chip and bring it over and pop into this board that is not working properly, and again put it in there. Turn the power on and see if that fixes the board. So you start with a remote, then you go with the receiver chip and see if that fixes the problem. If neither of those fix the problem here on this board, then quite likely the board has failed. If it works after you put in the receiver chip, then quite likely the receiver chip has failed. If it works after just when you bring the new remote over, then quite likely the remote has failed. So that is to help you decide and figure out exactly what possibly has went wrong with the control board. If your control board is working properly, yet it still does not go forward and reverse, then we want to move on down to the speed control. And again, as we noted, we want to make sure that we have 12 volts right here. On the power end of the speed control, it says power right there. We want to again make sure that we have good power there. Once we know that we have power, one way to begin right away is to test the speed control is these two clear buttons right here. And we can simply push the white button, and basically what it does, it bypasses the control board, and it just isolates the control board and allows us to command the control board, the speed control, to go forward and reverse. Now you will notice when it has power, good power, we have a nice yellow light there. We also notice that when I push forward and reverse, there's two lights down here close to this yellow light that indicate that it's going one direction or the other. Now, if we do that and our speed control is still, our motor does not run, our poultry hawk is not running back and forth, then we'll go to the next step and we'll isolate the speed pot. And the way we can do that is we simply unplug the speed pot here, pull it out, and that disconnects the speed pot from the speed control. Then we want to turn off our power, make sure and turn off the power, and get yourself a pliers and simply change this JP4 jumper. You'll notice right beside it, it says JP4, and we're simply going to move this jumper to the outside there. To those, we're just going to move it over, and you will see that bypasses the speed pot. And what it does is this blue thing here is now the speed control. So we'll hook our power back up, and this blue thing is now the speed control. And you'll notice as I turn this brass screw, it is acting as a speed control. So if that gets us working, then we know that our speed pot has went bad. Another thing to keep an eye on is sometimes on a few failures, when the speed control has burned up, there's been a burnt area right in the middle. So that's one thing you can look at very quickly as well. That if there's looks like there's burnt in there, then probably the speed control has failed. If we immediately come here and we hit these buttons and it works, the speed control runs the motor. But yet when we're running our control board, it's not, when it clicks in and it's not running the motor, then perhaps the connection between the control board and the speed control, there's something faulty there. So sometimes it's helpful to just go ahead and disconnect these wires, just check it and just plug it back in and make sure that there's a good connection there. So that should help you to kind of get an idea there in the relationship between the control board, the speed control. We just want to basically, we start at the top, make sure 12 volts is coming in, make sure the control board is working properly. Once we know that is working properly, then we work our way to the speed control and we kind of funnel it down. The other thing that I want to mention is the proximity switch. In order for the poultry hawk to go through a stop, we have to hold the command button. So if, for instance, we have to go forward and we have to hold our forward button down until this proximity switch clears the stop. Now sometimes, for whatever reason, if the proximity switch gets damaged or something happens, or maybe even something internally, that light will stay on. When there's a yellow light on, that means there's something in front of the proximity switch. And so that can be either something malfunctioning with the proximity switch, or again, maybe there's a piece of metal in front of it. And so that's something to check there. In order to isolate the proximity switch, we can simply unplug the proximity switch. And the poultry hawk should run without the proximity switch hooked up. And that kind of isolates that to make sure that that is not the problem. So hopefully this has been a help to you as you're there troubleshooting your poultry hawk and control panel. This doesn't cover everything, but this is 80% of what is happening in that box. Of course, if you look at all of this and everything seems to be in working order and there's still something that isn't working right, of course you always want to keep your eye on a loose wire that is out of place, or so be it. You always want to be very careful as you're working in there that the power is off, and again that you're looking for any loose wire or something that may not be in place. Of course, you'll want to make sure that on the side of the poultry hawk there's reset breakers, and you always want to make sure that those are not tripped. and make sure that the power is flowing through them like they are supposed to be doing. Hopefully this has been beneficial to you. If you have more problems, feel free to give us a call here at Innovative Poultry Products, and we want to help you to get that poultry hawk back up and running.